schemas that you create early on in your childhood, they're really difficult to change. For example, if a child is neglected or abandoned, it is likely that he or she develops a self-schema that they are unlovable, which could then result in her self-sabotaging or him self-sabotaging any potential relationships that they have with people because they fear that they're going to be abandoned or neglected again. So this is a very classic example of beliefs and schemas people can have and how that influences their experiences and decisions later on in life and how they think, right? They're constantly thinking that they're going to be abandoned, but because because they're unlovable, because they have in their early childhood experienced some doubt of whether people really love them. So schema therapy is a type of therapy also, which focuses on trying to change maladaptive schemas, basically negative schemas that don't really help us survive and are often used with personality disorders. Personality disorders, they're really interesting. I'm really fascinated by personality disorders, to be honest. They are very different from mood disorders such as depression. Mood is something that comes and goes, and it's not very enduring and long lasting, as opposed to personality, which is something that a person is. It's who you are. A personality disorder then is a flaw or something in the personality that is not quite functional or adaptive. So that then also means that changing a person's personality takes a whole lot more effort and sometimes may not even be possible, right? And a lot of these personality disorders are based on schemas that have been established really early on in childhood. And these are faulty schemas of, let's say, for example, deficiency and weakness and disrespect and inadequacy or being unlovable rather. So schema therapy, what it basically does is tries working with that person who is struggling with the personality that they've developed of themselves by trying to change their schemas. And again, it's a very long and difficult process that they take on. Here is a link for you to read a little more if you're interested on schema therapy and borderline personality disorder, which is one of the personality disorders. There's, I think, 7 others. Another thing that you can do some additional reading on is Piaget's theory of cognitive development. That basically talks about how our cognitions develop from childhood to adulthood. So these are 2 additional readings that you can do. You don't have to. This would be especially helpful for people who want to take up the EE in psychology. So it gives you some ideas of areas you can explore. Okay, so now that we have a basis on what schemas are, it is relevant to know that there are different types of schemas. So to begin with, there are self-schemas, right? Self-schemas are representations that we have about ourselves. How do we view ourselves? What are our characteristics? What are the things we like and what are the things that we don't like? What are our aspirations? These are basically what self-schemas are. An example of a self-schema that I hold is that I think I'm really funny. And this is not necessarily true, which again shows that it is not necessary for a schema to be accurate. I might then focus on evidence of people laughing at my jokes as opposed to all the times that people don't laugh at my joke. Yeah, like for example now. Anyways, social schemas are then representations of norms, etiquette, specific groups of people in society, right? It's how should I behave in what situation? One example of a social norm could be not sneezing without putting your hand in front of your mouth, right? That can be a social schema. Cultural schemas, they're kind of similar like social schemas, right? But not really. Cultural schemas are more specific to the culture one person belongs to. It can be representations of the culture you belong to, and it also can be representations of other people's cultures. An example of a cultural schema that I hold is that I need to respect adults, right? And I think some of you might be able to associate with that. So for me to talk back to an adult, would be going against my schemas and the schemas of that my culture holds as a whole. And that could cause cognitive dissonance and a lot of upsetting people. Role schemas, again, these are very similar but still quite different. Role schemas, representations that you hold of the person's role, the role that the individual takes up, such as, for example, a teacher, an engineer, mother, daughter, father, sister, the role that the person takes up, right? We have expectations or representations of these roles. Of a silly example, and again, I don't want people to take this to heart, is of engineers that I have. In India, there are a lot of software engineers. And let's say, for example, I'm on a dating site and the person says, oh, yeah, I'm a software engineer here, here, here. And the first thing I'm like, oh, that person's probably boring, right? So I'm associating being boring with the role of being a software engineer, which is, again, a gross generalization and it's untrue. But yeah, that could be a schema that a person holds about a person's role, right? People have schemas about teachers. For example, they think teachers don't have a life after school. That is, again, a schema and can lead to stereotyping. Scripts, which I would say for our reference is the last type of schema. It is the representation of the sequence of specific events or routines that we have. It could be what is your morning routine before going to school? You need to take a bath, or some of you actually prefer taking a bath in the evening. So do you just brush your teeth? Whatever your routine is, that is your script. A personal example that I have is of having football matches. I have been playing football since I was in grade 6, I think, and I've played at different levels. So for me, before a match, my routine as an athlete was very important. And if I didn't follow that routine, which involved waking up early in the morning, doing, let's say, for example, some breathing and stretches, and then eating a wholesome breakfast, then listening to really pumped up music, then going into my match, making sure that we warmed up and we did the same warm up each time, at least a majority of it, depending on the weather. And then after the warm up, we had to pray as a team. If we didn't do all of these things, I always would think that, oh my God, this is not going to be a good match. We're going to lose. So it's quite superstitious, my routine, and it may have been beneficial for me as a player or it may not have, but that was the script that I hold or mental representation I held as someone who was going to go play a football match. So the activity that I have for you is to record your own personal schemas in the 5 different types that we've discussed. And after that, you will be watching a video on the halo effect, which is a very good example of how first impressions really cloud our judgment of people. One of the examples that I gave you before was, let's say, for example, we had a new teacher coming into school, and from a friend you heard that this teacher is really strict. So your first impression of them is already created, and you have established a schema. So now when the person comes in, let's say, for example, this person is really friendly, you're probably experiencing some cognitive dissonance. And if this is something you're willing to accommodate, you will change that schema, or you will just say, oh, this person's just having a good day. Okay? Once you're done with that, we will go into the next lecture and I will be discussing your results from the first activity in this class. Okay. If you have any questions in the meantime, just message on the chat and I will respond as soon as I can.